Welcome to Women Being Loved, a weekly podcast and upcoming book series to help you and other women 35 and beyond attract deep, passionate, lasting love while honoring your authentic self. I'm Tadra, your host. Hello, lovelies. Welcome if you're new. Welcome back if you're returning. I hope you are doing well, beyond well. I hope you're doing beautifully. Let's jump in. I'm excited to share some stuff with you today. I'm going to be sharing some true stories, as usual, from my upcoming book, Love Will Find You. And these three women from today's stories had pivotal experiences that guided them away from a pattern of settling for what they didn't want to being empowered to ask for what they did want in a love relationship. So, what happened when they asked? Are they still waiting? Are they happily married now? As women, asking for what we truly want instead of what we think we can have, that is the challenge. And part of the reason for that, of course, is how society conditions us. We are conditioned from a very young age to be compliant, to get along, to be liked. And that may not come from your family, but it definitely comes from society, sometimes in very subtle, almost undetectable ways. But when we shed those weights, and they are weights, we become freer and more confident. We find our voices. We identify what our needs are, and we ask for what we want. Let's look at some examples. We'll start with Nancy. So Nancy is actually a friend of mine. And she was a twice divorced mom, or is, I guess, she still is a twice divorced mom of two teenagers. She was in a 2.5-year long distance relationship with Ray, who is a guy she met at Whole Foods. It does happen, ladies. And she was living in Colorado and he was living in New Jersey. I tell you that because that's an important part. Remember that for later. And she said their relationship was amazing, that she had never met anyone that she connected with so beautifully, and she really wanted to move forward with the relationship. So that's a snapshot of their beginning. We're going to pick up about 70% into their story, and I want you to listen for the empowered statement that Nancy makes. And as a side note, all the women make an empowered statement that is beautiful. Because of the distance between us, we only saw each other every 6 weeks, but we talked and prayed on the phone together every day for 2.5 years. Meanwhile, my daughters were growing up and graduating high school. They chose colleges on the East Coast while I grappled with my next move. Checking my bank account, it was evident that my current lifestyle wasn't sustainable. I needed someplace with a lower cost of living and more interest in my skill sets. Ray said he'd like me to move to New Jersey, near him. A part of me had hoped he'd ask, but I also knew I needed more than a casual commitment. That sounds like fun, I said, but I'm not starting my life over in a new place to be someone's girlfriend. Ray was silent on the other end of the phone. Oh, he's not offering a commitment. We ended that evening's call on a quiet note. I'd planned a trip to see him the following week. The plane ticket was purchased, but I questioned if I should go. Something inside of me, though, told me not to give up just yet. I flew out for the weekend. When Sunday came around and I was packing my carry-on bag to return home, Ray asked me to go for a hike. He chose the bluff with views of New York City's skyline in the distance. Reaching the top, to my complete surprise, Ray bent down on one knee. Before he said a word, I was bawling, waving my hands back and forth in front of my face, trying to stop the tears. Ray pulled out a vintage engagement ring. It had belonged to his grandmother, and asked me to be his wife. We married 7 months later in his parents' backyard with just our immediate family. We honeymooned in Hawaii. Nice story. Nice story. Nancy was 51 when she married Ray, just so you know. Did you hear her statement of empowerment? Did you hear her make it very clear what she was and was not going to do? I will repeat it for you. I'm not starting my life over in a new place to be someone's girlfriend. She said what she said. This was a woman who knew exactly what she wanted. She was not afraid to state her truth. And you know what? Ray understood exactly what she was saying because his actions less than a week later confirmed that. Now, I want to stress that this was what Nancy wanted. This is how Nancy chose to handle it. She knew herself. She knew what her feelings were for Ray. However, and please hear this clearly, this is not a one-size-fits-all example. I have interviewed women who have picked up and moved to a location where the men they were dating lived, even sometimes to another country. But here's the thing. Those women knew they weren't ready for that kind of commitment. Like they weren't moving hoping that he would ask to marry them. They were moving to explore the relationship more for themselves to see if they even wanted that. They were also moving for the adventure of going somewhere new. Like they wanted that. They were not moving for the men. They were actually moving for themselves, for their own reasons. So you have to know yourself and what you want in order to make that clear to someone else, right? You can't ask for what you want if you aren't even sure what that is. Nancy knew exactly what she wanted and she went for that. All right, just wanted to say that. The next example is one of a woman who worked really hard to know herself, really hard, and to understand why she was repeating the same destructive relationship patterns over and over again. I think a lot of us can relate to that. Ladies, that's work that has to be done before you can ask for what you want. It just does. There's no avoiding it. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. There's just no avoiding it. So in her story, Briana had recently met a man named Philippe. Yes, he was French, who she really, really had a connection with. There is a twist to the story about who this man turned out to be, but I am not going to ruin that part of the story for you. You can read that later. But I am going to give you a little bit of her backstory, tell you where she came from, because that's important, and how she came into her power and the ability to state what she wanted. Handling relationship dynamics wasn't always easy for me. I grew up in a home where one parent was an alcoholic, so I was surrounded by unhealthy interactions and lots of enabling. That translated into my own bad decisions. I dated alcoholics and meth and heroin addicts most of my life. In therapy, I questioned why I could not find stable, lasting relationships. My therapist said something that shifted my entire life. Why don't you stop dating addicts? It sounds weird to say it, but that had never occurred to me as the problem. Up until that point, I'd probably dated 15 men who were addicted to something. My son's father was a meth addict. I didn't realize it when we first got together at 20 and had a baby. Once I learned about my partner's addiction, I still tried to make us work against all odds. Of course, that was unrealistic. Babe, I'm going out for a bit. My partner grabbed his coat, kissed me, and pulled the door behind him. He never came back. I didn't know if he was dead or alive. It was horrible at first, but slowly I came to understand that his disappearance from our lives was a blessing in disguise. He wasn't around to cause chaos and disappointment for me and my son. Yes, it was hard for me as a single mother, but I made it work. Dating a pool of men and bringing them around my son wasn't an option. I knew I wanted a healthy, full spectrum relationship with someone who'd be my best friend, partner, and lover. And addicts were no longer my default. I wasn't going to settle for less than I deserved. When Philippe came into my life, I was the healthiest version of myself that I'd ever been. I understood myself thanks to therapy and my spiritual practice. From the very beginning, I articulated to Philippe what I was looking for in a relationship so there'd be no confusion or wasted time for either of us. And I made it clear it didn't have to be him. I wasn't putting that pressure on Philippe. And if what I was saying that I needed didn't resonate with him, that was fine. I'd wait for whoever would have the same vision. Luckily, after I put my cards on the table, Philippe said, I'm in. Oh, there were so many key points in Brianna's story. Let's unpack them together. First, she went to therapy. Now, I know, we can't all afford that, and healthcare plans don't always cover that, and all that stuff. I get it. I am not making light of that. But if you can, go to therapy. It can save you years of circling the same drain, frustrated and hurt. I have done therapy, and it has been a game changer. Second, Brianna had a spiritual practice. Whatever that looks like for you, that can make a huge difference as well. It can be prayer, meditation, walks in nature. It doesn't have to be some organized religion if that's like a trigger for you. Find what works for you. Whatever gets you in a calm, full space, that is what's golden. Thirdly, Brianna reframed what seemed like the worst possible thing, being left alone at 21 with a baby. But she was able to step back at a point, and this didn't happen immediately, but at a point she was able to step back and see the bigger picture. Now, she could have easily drifted into bitterness and victimhood because, what happened wasn't what she hoped for. Let's put it that way. But she didn't. She didn't let bitterness take over. She didn't just stay in a space of victimhood. Fourth, Brianna learned her self-worth. Did you hear what she said? I wasn't going to settle for less than I deserved. My favorite part of her story, because just to be transparent, I've often struggled with this part. She had faith that if Philippe wasn't on board, there'd be someone else. She did not have a scarcity mindset. Like, if I lose Philippe, it's all over. I will be alone forever. Nope. She trusted that what was best for her would find her. And finally, she told Philippe from the very beginning what her terms and conditions were. As a side note, if you've not heard the song Terms and Conditions by Mahalia, wonderful British artist, look it up. It's 100% what I'm talking about here today. It's also a fun bop. I'll put the link in the show notes. Brianna did not string Philippe along, hoping that he would somehow, decipher what she wanted without her actually using her words and telling him. Ladies, tell them. She stated up front and clear, this is what I'm looking for. You'll have to read their story in my book to find out the ending, but you got a hint that it ended well, right? Brianna was 41 when she met Philippe, just as a reference. All right, one more woman's story. By the way, I'm going to just insert something here. These stories are meant to give you power against the voices in your head that tell you, for whatever reason, that you have to accept whatever's right in front of you, whether it's a good fit or not. And you can't ask for what you want. That's what that voice is saying. You are being too picky. How many times have you heard that? You need to lower your expectation. please. In the two stories I just shared with you, both women were single moms. One of them has spent years dating drug addicts before she realized why and that she deserved better than that. The other woman had been divorced twice. One of them was in her 40s, the other was in her 50s. I reiterate these details because it's so easy to disqualify ourselves for all sorts of reasons. I'm a single mom. I'm not young anymore. I'm not from a good family. I'm poor. I have health issues. I tell you, the women I interviewed, each of them had their own challenges, some of these very things. But once they released that, they realized there's so much possibility for joy and love just on the other side. Lori. Lori's story is about a woman who stated her truth twice. This woman's a freaking superhero, okay? I'm going to tell you about the first time she did this and how it turned out. A little bit of backstory. She was with her boyfriend for 7 years, and by her own admission, she wasn't concerned about getting married. She was happy with the way things were. Yes, ladies, that happens. Some of us are like, I'm good. But then something happened. Here's her account. The closest I've ever gotten to the white picket fence was Jeremy. He and I met through mutual friends who thought we'd be a good match. I'll admit, our compatibility score was high. Our upbringings were similar, our values aligned, and his moral compass was pointed in the same direction as mine. I also appreciated that Jeremy was supportive and respectful of my then fledgling company, something other men didn't always offer. I believed Jeremy and I were constructing something special. But when life got difficult, the cracks in our foundation began to show. First, Jeremy received a serious health diagnosis. On the heels of that, his brother and my brother-in-law died within months of each other, both from lung cancer. A few months later, my dad died. Jeremy and I were reeling from shock and grief. Lying in bed at 2:30 a.m., thoughts on the brevity and unpredictability of life kept me awake. Nothing, not a single day, was guaranteed. Somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten that. In that moment, I went from a woman who felt like she had all the time in the world to being a woman who wanted the template, marriage to a man I loved in a house I owned that felt like a home. Now, children still didn't feel like a pressing desire, but I was willing to have the conversation. When I shared all of this with Jeremy, he was visibly scared and withdrawn. I'm not giving you an ultimatum, I tried to assure him. I'm simply expressing what my needs are. I need to be engaged by the end of this year. I don't want to continue in limbo. I've been doing this. We've been doing this for 7 years. Sidestepping most of what I'd said, he answered, "You want a house? Fine. Go buy a house. Go ahead." So I did. And Jeremy never, not once, stayed over my house. Looking back, I think he was jealous of it and a little put out that I didn't need him to make that part of my desire a reality. We were still together, but we were splintering. The Christmas holidays came and neither of us mentioned the elephant in the room. With 3 days left until the new year, I assumed Jeremy had made his decision and we'd go our separate ways in January. To my surprise, he produced a diamond engagement ring on the first day of the new year, along with a half-hearted proposal, one that felt coerced, almost resigned. That was not what I wanted. I deserved a husband who was full in and wanted, with everything in him, to share life with me. I broke up with Jeremy. Okay, girl, know your power. Now, obviously, there's more to Lori's story because my book is about women who found amazing love. So there is a round 2 for Lori. But I chose to share this part of her story with you today because I believe in presenting reality. Sometimes when you get clear on what you need and what you want, it reveals to you that the current relationship you're in ain't it. It is not going to go the distance. Oh, that's a hard thing, you know? What you want and what someone else wants may not even be on the same planet. I remember dating a guy years and years and years and years ago, very briefly, by the way, who told me he wanted a house full of children. That was a hard no for me. And when I told him my career goals, he was like, nah, nope. And I was young at the time, like very young. And I remember being so hurt because I was really attracted to him. And I don't mean just like in a superficial way, like how he looked, but I was attracted to his charisma, which just turned out to be player energy. But, I was too young to know that at the time. So honestly, I dodged a bullet. I did. But sometimes, you'll meet a man or a woman that you really connect with energetically. And I don't just mean sexually. I mean, like, there's this easy vibe, there's fun between the two of you. There's like almost like a unspoken reality between the two of you. And maybe that carries you along for like months or even years. But at some point you're like, hey, should we like have a real discussion about the future? And then you do, and those futures look nothing alike. And you're just sitting there thinking, what have we been doing? It's a hard call, but can you say what Briana said? If it's not you, I will wait for someone with the same vision as me. Can you do what Lori did? Stare down a ring, stare down a man ready to give you the quote dream. And you're like, no, your heart ain't in it. No, I don't want that. I don't want it that way. Yeah. So there are some decisions to be made. Now, that disclaimer I gave earlier about some women do move to another place and blah, blah, blah. Maybe you will count the cost and realize that you would rather have the future this person is offering you over everything else. Okay, don't let anyone shame you for your choices, but make sure you're making choices with your eyes wide open and a clear understanding of yourself. That's going back to what Briana said about therapy and a spiritual practice and all of those things, make sure you are clear with yourself first, because you can't voluntarily give up your dreams and then be bitter with the other person for the rest of your lives. Don't do that, sis. Don't do that. You don't want regret from a situation that you created. Okay, that's this week's episode. I hope it was inspiring or at least entertaining. I will see you soon. I love you. And remember, love will find you.